And I'm wondering where this culture of machinery, was that something you wove into the story? That was something that was in the story at the outset?
Well, the title definitely was there before I joined the project. In fact, I don't think I'd even heard of the game, the first year that it was in production. So I think definitely the standard meanings for the term were the original inspiration for the the title for the game. I think the core meaning is probably centered on the Illuminati acting as puppeteers and basically making themselves into gods through machinery and basically deciding the outcome of the world on their own from a secret place. Basically, the god in a Greek play was lowered in at the end as kind of a surprise, and I think that the Illuminati are considered this hidden force that will raise their hand at a crucial moment.
The game opens up with this image, which is all the more impressive because it's not insisted upon, the decapitated Statue of Liberty. It's such a striking image, all the more powerful because it's not explained up front, as so much of the game is not, and you're sort of drawn into asking what has gone wrong. And I'm wondering, and was that quite deliberate to sort of start off with this image?
Yeah, definitely. I actually talked to Harvey today about that. This is a good example of where the map designers come up with an idea and implement an idea, and then the writers flesh it out. This was actually something that was built into the game prior to when I started at Ion Storm, and I spun it different ways with the dialogue, and I talked to Harvey, and he said his initial just impetus to do it was just as an ironic, emblem of, a terrorist target, terrorists that are fighting for freedom who have destroyed a symbol of freedom. It's kind of interesting. You build these things, and I think a lot of times the designers have a very instinctive feeling for something that's going to be arresting, and don't necessarily, know exactly how to put everything into words when they build a location. And you just a lot of times when you're writing a fiction itself, you don't always know what beautiful interpretations you can give it. I think the same is true for a lot of map building, where you can you build something and the meaning of it grows as you flesh out the mission and flesh out the stories and flesh out the dialogue.
I wonder what you thought of Chad's remarks in the light of what happened on 9/11.
Well, it's definitely very surreal to see all of this stuff begin to happen in the real world. There's kind of an anecdotal fact. It turns out that the skyline that we used in Deus Ex for New York is missing the trade towers.
I noticed that too, yeah.
And that it wasn't deliberate. It was left out just by the artist in the process of creating the art, and the decision was made not to waste the time to go back and put them in. We just figured, okay, we'll just fictionalize that the trade towers were destroyed by a terrorist act. And we never really put that into the game as content, but that was our decision, and we kind of made it lightly at the time, as though, okay, whatever, we'll just destroy the trade towers. And now it's happened for real, and it feels a lot more weighty than a few pixels in a piece of art that few designers can erase or add in as they see fit.
And do you feel that the imaginary terrorists in the game, the NSF, the National Secessionist Force, have I got that correctly? Do they have, I don't want to say they have an enemy in common with Osama Bin Laden, but do they have a similar agenda, or?
In a sense, they're definitely homegrown terrorists compared to the kind of real terrorists that the United States is facing right now. But they have similarities in that, it almost sounds trite to say it, but they are kind of going after the big capital that supposedly runs the world and runs business. And I think it's very similar if you look at the world globally and where terrorists come from and where the desperation is bred that makes terrorism and especially suicide, bombings, and that kind of thing possible. There is a subtle, maybe not even subtle, just disparity in wealth and circumstance for people around the world. And even though a country like the United States or any first world country may put a happy face on their global policies for protecting their interests around the world and whatnot, the bottom line is that they look after their interests. They use their capital that they've built up over centuries of being a step ahead of everyone else, and they use that as their lever to get work out of less fortunates and build greater wealth for themselves. So I think that same sentiment drives a lot of the militia movements in the United States, the people that rebel against taxes, and a lot of the people who developed the conspiracy theories to begin with about the world banks and the Illuminati and the high and mighty.
There's a very sly line at the very beginning when you're being introduced to the NSF, which are formerly your enemies. The doctor Jaime Reyes, who's very credible, says these guys think they're fighting the Second American Revolution.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that the goals of a lot of these groups in the United States now, for whatever merit they may have, are definitely parallel to the original American Revolution, which was independence from a larger mercantile entity, and in that sense, I think they're very parallel.
I was reading a story about an American and a Bear poet who met, and the Bear said that poets always wrote about what they have least, and he said that's why his poems were about water. And then he turned to the American and said, and I noticed that your poems are always about love. What do you think that people with computers, people who play computer games and who get into them deeply, what is it that they have least of, and what is it and do the computer games like Deus Ex provide it?
Well, I think all across science fiction there's this, and maybe even beyond science fiction, there's this kind of what I call urban pastoral component to so much of what is being written these days as entertainment. And I think of it in terms of during the Industrial Revolution, where so many poets began to write, poets who were living in dingy cities started to write these wonderful, beautiful poems about the countryside, which they no longer were a part of. And I think that so much of current literature writes in the same way about inner city life and the hardships of the street and this really gritty underworld that is completely foreign to most of the people who consume the entertainment product. And I would include, the cyberpunk fiction in that, and definitely most video games, and probably our game as well.
During the game, it's possible if the player or the avatar so chooses to kill people using any number of really sophisticated ways, flamethrowers, pistols, darts, machetes, swords, whatever. But it's actually not possible in the game, even when you're confronted with a companion or a prostitute, to actually take that prostitute away. Is there, and take the prostitute to bed? What are the legal reasons and any philosophical reasons why that's not possible in a video game in America right now?
Well, there's probably a prosaic answer to that and a more philosophical one. I definitely agree that the American sensibilities are very imbalanced regarding violence and sex, and it is very disturbing that we can have a game where you can, hit somebody with a machine gun, but where sex would be very inflammatory and disturbing to a lot of people. Our decision to do it was, more mundane, where we actually had talked about it kind of informally among the designers, where, we thought maybe you could pay a prostitute or whatever for a night, and like in a cheesy action movie, you fade to black and you fade up, and the next morning there she is, your friend, and she tells you some information. And, that's not an extraordinary plot point. It wasn't really that important to us to get that particular thing in. But, the reason not to do it was that it creates this time thing that messes with the design, with time passing. You need the engine to be able to move you from locations. And if we were going to do a love scene, that would be a lot of art assets, a lot of effort. And so we didn't really put out effort into specific character interactions. So it's almost all dialogue and then some pretty canned voice lip syncing. So that, for us, the resources just weren't there. I don't know if we particularly had we were afraid of being sued for putting sex in the game.
Yeah, it's ironic because no one will file a lawsuit for your creating a game in which a flamethrower can be whipped out and you can literally fry to a crisp 50 Americans. But
if we had a naked woman in there, it would be all over the news probably.
That's right.
So yeah, I definitely think that's a little bit wrong. But it's also true that games these days, it's very easy to hurl a bullet across the map and decide whether it hits something, whether it collides with a collision cylinder or something. Whereas it's much harder to build a human being that looks alive and really seems to be expressing love and whatnot. And I think that, for sound business reasons and for perhaps lack of adventurousness, people will take the route that is easy to implement with today's technology.
Got it. I noticed some of your writing is around Hong Kong, and the game is set in a variety of places. The Hong Kong setting was particularly arresting. I haven't been to Hong Kong, and it was a marvelous recreation of what it must be like. I'm wondering whether you brought some experience to that, or whether it was scripted.
Actually, I had traveled in Southeast Asia a little bit just prior to starting on Deus Ex, so that helped quite a bit. And I have friends out that direction. I'd never made it to Hong Kong itself, and I really wish I had, but it definitely had a little bit of background that helped me get the feel across. I think I had a really good physical sense of what it's like to be in that part of the world, in those really big Asian cities.